In today's episode, there are just a couple potentially activating topics, including sexual assault, trauma, and hauntings. Nothing will be graphic. Enjoy. Jerry.
Yes.
As Sophia Petrillo would say, picture it. It's a cold winter night in 1878. You're sitting around the dinner table with your family. It's a quiet farming town in Nova Scotia. It's been a pretty damn boring day. Okay.
Yeah.
Dinner's almost over. Someone reaches
day.
for another, I don't know, a potato. And before anyone can say a word, one launches across the room. Everyone freezes. A few seconds pass. Another potato flies across the room.
Wait, a potato itself flies across?
A potato flies across. There are now 2 potatoes that have flown across the room. Over the next several weeks, neighbors are going to claim way more than potatoes. They're going to watch furniture sliding across the floor on its own. They're going to hear loud knocks echoing through the walls with no apparent source. Fires starting without explanation. Messages appearing on the walls. And doctors are going to come and they're going to examine the young woman at the center of it all. And some of them are going to leave just as puzzled as they arrived. And I think it's always like this. It's an ordinary family. They're the people next door and in front of witnesses, because this already is probably sounding familiar to you. But this did not just make its way to our podcast today by word of mouth, because my favorite, people are writing letters about it. Newspapers are covering it. Physicians are documenting it. And so even today, about 150 years later, no one is in agreement on what actually happened. Was it an incredible poltergeist case? Was it folie à deux, some big shared delusion? Or was it a young woman being haunted? But there could also be another explanation entirely. I'm Heather.
I'm Jerry.
And this is Alter Ego. Today, we are traveling to Amherst, Nova Scotia, to explore one of the most famous paranormal cases you've probably never heard of. Because I hadn't, and I feel like I've heard of a bunch of them.
I don't know what you're talking about.
This is the story of Esther Cox.
Okay, Esther. What's up, Esther?
Well, let's find out what's up with Esther. So before we get into flying furniture and flying potatoes and mysterious fires, because there will be some arson, I want to get us more acquainted with Amherst. Today, it's home to like 10,000 people.
Okay.
But in 1878, it was way smaller. It was a very close-knit community, as I feel like these cases always include. People knew everybody's business. Church was very central to daily life. And if something unusual happened, be flying vegetables or not, word traveled fast. So basically, it's where you and I went to college.
I was literally thinking.
So yeah. So living there was 18-year-old Esther Cox. Now, I will give a disclaimer for anyone who does feel like this story sounds familiar. Depending on the source you're reading, you may have seen her referred to as Esther Honens, Esther Cox, or Esther Teed at different points in her life. And that's actually because family names change through marriages, blended households, nothing weird or uncommon. She wasn't like trying to change her identity. It's just the way that families move. But for simplicity's sake, her surname does not matter to us today. We're just going to call her Esther the whole time.
Okay, got it.
She was not wealthy, but they also weren't like living in poverty. She wasn't claiming to have any sort of gift like the Fox sisters, because I feel like it's a little...
I definitely had already thought about that.
Yeah, it's giving that vibe.
She's going to try and, yeah.
Okay. By all accounts, she's just a salt of the earth gal, if you will. Very hardworking, family-oriented, and because she is a woman in the 1800s, she wasn't exactly independent. She lived in a modest rented house with several family members, which included her sister Olive, Olive's husband Daniel Teed, their children, another sister named Jenny, Jenny's child, and Esther's brother William. Yeah, it was a full house.
That's a lot of people.
And that also means there's a lot of personalities and very little privacy. It's just a...
big old yeah.
So this becomes important, the lack of privacy, because there are very few moments in this story where Esther's alone. So pretty much everything we're going to talk about, there's some sort of witness to what happened.
Okay.
So if you've listened to us for a while, you know that one thing we always try to do is separate what's documented from what's been added over the last century and a half to make it juicy. And that was actually kind of harder than I expected with this case. Mostly because most of what people know today comes from a book written by a man named Walter Hubble, not a fictionalized book, but like a documented telling.
Like a recounting of.
Correct.
Okay.
But we're going to see that Walter's maybe not like a super reliable narrator. He's complicated. We'll get to him.
Okay.
But here's what we do know. The strange events were talked about by the neighbors. Doctors reportedly witnessed some of the occurrences, and local newspapers did cover pieces of the story.
Okay.
So while historians debate what happened, there's very little debate that something happened because the whole town was pretty captivated by the goings-on.
Okay.
There were enough people involved that this really couldn't stay inside the walls of this house because just like the Fox sisters, people came to see it. So if you remember, their childhood home at one point had like 100 people in the living room, just like listening for knocks. So much so that apparently the girls were like, yeah, we're just going to go take a walk.
We're going to go hang out by the creek or something.
Well, and it was like that because some folks were there wanting to prove it. Some wanted to disprove it. And again, with where we are in time, some people were probably just bored. We're like, hey, free entertainment. Let's go.
That's like one of my favorite things that you and I have talked about is the fact that like, why is it that things don't feel like that anymore? And it's because everyone was sitting around doing nothing. And you could go two different ways. It could be that you're more tapped into your intuition and your senses because there's less distraction, or the case of like, oh, it's because everybody was bored and it was like there was more things that they wanted to happen. So you're wanting more things to happen. But anyway.
Yeah, you're imagining it because you're bored out of your mind, or you're aware of it because you're not sucked into a tablet.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah. But before they became the hottest house on the block, Esther was, no offense, a nobody. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, she starts waking up terrified. And at first, it kind of, to me at least, sounded like night terrors because nothing really specific was happening. She just would wake up with this intense feeling of dread. And about that same time, her family members started hearing a very specific sound in the house. Can you guess what the sound was?
A tapping, maybe.
A tapping, a knocking sound, exactly. And at first, they did what most of us probably would. They checked the walls, they looked for little rodents, they thought maybe the house is just settling, but they couldn't quite figure it out. But the sounds continued, and they started to get louder and louder until they were impossible to ignore. Everyone, and that was a lot of people, in the house could hear them. And that's where I think it's worth putting ourselves in their shoes because remember, like to what Jerry just said, this is 1878. There's no electrical wiring buzzing in the walls. There's no HVAC making strange noises. And there's no TikTok videos, watching people's haunted houses or their RPGs or, so you're not like sitting there paranoid wondering, is my house haunted? Was that sound a ghost? It's really not top of mind for you. So
I wonder, to just kind of put a pin in this, I wonder then what the discussion was around paranormal activity. I mean, I know it technically wasn't even.
So when something happened that they couldn't immediately explain, what a perfect segue, they just reached for explanations that they had. But for many people in Amherst, the supernatural wasn't the last resort. What no one could have predicted was that the knocking was only the beginning. So if you've ever lived in an old house, and Jerry and I both have, you know that they make noises. Floors creak, pipes groan, wood expands and contracts, changes with the weather. Most of us are going to at some point hear something, and most of us are probably going to shrug it off and move on. That's not what happened in Amherst. The knocking didn't stop, it became intentional. According to multiple accounts, if someone moved to another room, so too did the sound. Sometimes they came from inside the walls. Other times, I would not like this, it sounded like they were coming from beneath the floorboards.
No, thank you. Why is beneath the floorboards
So
so
much
much more
worse?
scary than in the walls? I've never thought that before.
I don't know, but it is. Something about it is not okay.
It feels like Tremors versus like,
It's like
something different.
Telltale Heart versus
Yeah.
a mouse in the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and so family members, of course, were searching for loose boards. They're looking for trapped animals,
Mhm.
anything that could explain what they're hearing and why it seemed like it was following them around. But they just couldn't come up with a really good solution. So one night, Esther climbed into bed. I'm sure she was hoping to finally get some sleep because she is not sleeping well. But instead, the bed begins to shake. Witnesses describe the entire bed frame moving violently, so much so that it woke up everyone in the house. And that's a lot of people. So imagine being Oliver Daniel in the next room. You hear this commotion, you rush in expecting to find Esther having a nightmare, and instead, her bed is moving. I don't like it. Now, whether this happened exactly as described, I don't know. I wasn't there.
Mhm.
But what we do know is that the story spread quickly enough that people began to take notice. And then things got weirder because Esther herself began physically changing.
Ah,
Witnesses described her body swelling dramatically.
girl.
Relatable.
Someone with an autoimmune condition. The swelling
Yeah.
isn't real in the summer.
Right. Well, the first thing I thought about was like lymphedema, like, I don't know, her face, her hands, her entire body, everything is swelling up. Some accounts claim that her skin became flushed and hot to the touch.
Oh.
Others said that she appeared feverish one moment and completely normal the next. And
Okay.
concerned that she might be really ill, the family sent for their doctor.
Cool. Good. Great.
Listen to women.
Yeah.
This is where I want to be careful, though, because different versions of this story embellish what happened next.
Okay.
Some say that the doctor witnessed impossible events firsthand. Others are much more reserved. The most commonly repeated account is that while the physician was examining Esther, loud knocking erupted from beneath the bed.
Okay.
He reportedly searched for a physical cause, which I love imagining this doctor being like, is anything under the bed?
Yeah, him like I immediately envisioned him crawling on the ground and looking under the
Yeah.
bed skirt.
He could not find one, no
Mhm.
boogeyman. Now, does this mean ghosts? Not necessarily. But it does mean that Esther isn't just saying, trust me, something spooky is afoot, right? Because a doctor who we're going to assume is a little bit more esteemed, even though what is medicine at this time, still is like, this is strange.
Right.
There were enough witnesses that even skeptical observers admitted that something seemed to be weird. But then came one of the most famous incidents in this case. A loud crack echoed through the room. The family turned toward Esther's bed, and written across the wall, according to multiple retellings, were words that had not been there moments before. And those words were, Esther Cox, you are mine to kill. Now, let's pause for just a second because that sentence has become iconic in multiple paranormal books talking about this incident. But because Jerry and I are not here to sensationalize things, it is also one of those details that historians debate because it comes primarily through later accounts rather than independent documentation from the moment it allegedly occurred.
Okay.
Does that mean it didn't happen? I am not saying that.
Right.
It just means that maybe we want to hold that one with a little bit more skepticism than some of the better attested events. Because once a story becomes famous, as Jerry and I have seen time and time again in all of our research, dramatic details have a funny way of becoming even more dramatic.
Fish gets bigger.
Exactly. And so, whether those exact words appeared or not, whether any words appeared or not, the family believed that they were now dealing with something hostile. And from there, the activity escalated almost daily. Objects reportedly slid across the room without anyone touching them. Dishes would fall and break. Boxes moved. Furniture shifted. Loud bangs would interrupt their meals. And neighbors who came to investigate also claimed that they experienced these disturbances as well, which I think is important to keep returning to. And others left convinced that the family was somehow staging everything. And honestly, if someone invited me over today and was like, come watch my haunted dining room, I would probably think that there was a trick involved, even though I'm a believer. But I would absolutely do it just like the Fox sisters' house, because if nothing else, I would want to figure out, how are they doing this?
Yeah. Yep.
Like, are there fishing lines? Is someone under the table? And actually, my parents lived in a really haunted house in Charleston, and their ghost was upstairs. And they had a friend come over, and they had mentioned, like, yeah, the house is haunted. And he didn't believe them. And he came over, and they were eating pasta. And he put his fork down because he could hear someone like walking around upstairs. And he was like, very funny. I'm going to go figure it out. He went upstairs. They could hear him like stomping around, walking around. He came back down the stairs. He was white, and he just left. And he was like, I'm never going back to this house.
Wait, that's so funny.
But that's the vibe, right? Like, I would also be like, you seem pretty confident in this haunted house. And then I would want to
get your
decide for
pants
myself.
scared off.
Yeah. Like, is it actually or is it not? But this was not a one-time show. In fact, if we're talking about shows, this was more like a Vegas residency, because this went on for weeks. Eventually, curiosity overtook skepticism, and people just started showing up.
Oh my God.
Like, skeptics or not, they're like, you know what? I'm just going to pop over there, see what's up. At first,
I would totally do that.
Yeah, 1000%.
Like, of course, back then, when popping over to someone's house is like what you do, it's like, of course, I'm going to go pop over and check this out.
Yeah. And at first, I would think this would be really validating, because at least people believe that something wild is really happening to me, right? But for Esther, who already had no privacy or independence, being turned into somewhat of a sideshow now probably didn't feel awesome, because she's now this haunted girl that the whole town wants to see. And she had really become Amherst's mystery. But that mystery was about to attract the one person who could shape how the world remembers her story: a traveling actor and amateur writer named Walter Hubble. Before we get into Walter, I want to pause for a minute, because also, if you've listened to us for a while, you know that I like to take a breath and ask, what else could be going on here? And also, Jerry, with your big psychiatry brain, what could be happening? So
psychology brain.
Sorry, she doesn't prescribe anything. Psychology brain. Not because we're trying to disprove or prove anything that's going on, or because we're trying to diagnose anybody with anything, but because, as we've seen so far, there are often underlying things going on when it comes to hauntings or possessions that seem to be overlooked. One thing that jumped out at me while researching this is something that psychologists and paranormal investigators have both noticed for decades, and you and I have noticed it too, is why are so many alleged poltergeist cases, these stories where things are being moved, why do they revolve around adolescents? You have the Enfield poltergeist, the Bell Witch, depending on which version you believe, the Rosenheim case, the Clara possession that we already covered. There's always a teenager or someone in their early 20s. Esther was 18. So depending on who you ask, that means two very different things. If you ask someone like me who believes in the paranormal, they might say, young people are more susceptible to unexplained phenomena. They're more open and sensitive. I've also heard people suggest everything from heightened spiritual awareness to the idea that adolescence is a period where people are somehow more vulnerable to spiritual attack. I do not know. But if you were to ask a psychologist, maybe the answer looks different, because what's generally kind of going on in adolescence?
Oh my God. Both physically and mentally, I guess all three: physically, mentally, and emotionally. Mentally and emotionally, you are separating yourself from your caregivers. So your whole job is to basically hate your caregiver and whatever your caregiver wants of you, you're anti that.
Yeah.
As a teenager.
Yeah.
Like developmentally, just, forming your independence, but also like emotionally, like there's different lobes of your brain that are like further developing. Your risk assessment is kind of almost getting there, but not quite. But it's starting to develop. And also, like, nothing matters except for your peers. So it's like, if you don't have a good peer group or friend, if you don't have like really strong friend relationships, and you don't have a lot going on, I guess just relationally between people that are your age, then it's really distressing psychologically. And so I often think about that in these cases of like every time we talk about this, to me, and this may be a case of, through what has been documented, that people don't really acknowledge community within the storytelling or within the documentation. But it really does feel like a lot of times when we look at teenagers who are going through this kind of stuff, it seems like they're feeling pretty isolated. And so that's another part of this, is that, do I have an answer? No. But what I'm thinking is the level of, I mean, for Heather, for you, and literally anyone listening, I feel like I had a pretty substantial group of friends, or just even individual friendships in my teenage years, and you could not offer me any lump sum of money that would, if you said, I'll give you this money, that you would return to being 14 years old.
Oh God,
Between
no.
14 and 18. Like there's no amount of money in the world.
That gave me like a physical response in my body. I was like,
right. Because
no.
it's truly the most distressing period of, I'm convinced it's the most distressing period of life. My old supervisor told me the only population she won't work with is teenage girls. And wow. I feel like I've mentioned that before, but point being is that level of emotional distress, having all of these new experiences coming at you like big waves, and then not having the tools yet. And if you don't have the proper community or caregiver support to help you work through what to do with those big waves, then they just kind of crash on you in different ways. I've seen it happen. I've seen teens in psychosis. I've seen teens in like pretty intense manic episodes. I've seen them, and even using the word psychosis and mania to me feel almost derogatory sometimes, because it's like it's
stigmatized. I think
it's so stigmatized, and we don't have the proper, what I think oftentimes is really going on is that your body's responding pretty understandably to the circumstances. Maybe, and even at that time too, like as a teenager, you're what things you're eating or not eating. I've said this time and time again on here, a vitamin B deficiency can cause psychosis.
That's wild. Wow.
So it's like there's so many things where there's a perfect amount of recipe ingredients to make for things that are unfathomable to the onlooker or incomprehensible to an adult, or because once you're out of it, you
can't relate anymore.
You can't quite understand what that felt like, because you have different parts of your brain have developed. You have the tools now as an adult, and your system kind of understands that, okay, I can make it out alive from that experience. But I mean, I could literally talk about this forever, but I think oftentimes, if we were to look at things through the lens of like, okay, what's happening with this person's brain and body is quite literally developmentally, the waves are coming in, they're crashing over and over, almost like when you're at the beach and the waves are high, and you feel like when a wave hits you, it's coming, you go to recover, but there's another wave coming and hitting you, and you have no flotation devices, you have nobody else to kind of help pull you out of the water, and it just keeps happening over and over again. You wind up losing your breath, and then it's like, oh no, now I'm trying to survive. And then kicks in all the survival
mechanisms. Just panic.
Yeah. So there's lots of things. And it obviously depends on the person and the teenager, but there's just so many different ways that we could look at each case. And this one specifically, it's like, I would just have so many questions, like from all the way from what is this person eating and consuming every day? It's making me think of the LSD series, even of like, okay, was there some like weird, something that was being eaten by the people in the household that was like helping induce these like episodes?
What was in those potatoes?
And what was in those flying potatoes And I have seen cases where it's like, okay, there are a couple of people who, you know, have this shared experience, and it actually is more regulated to be like, okay, it was supernatural, because there's quite literally no other way to explain it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you know how I am, and then I'm like, okay, but maybe it was something that was could it have been something that was supernatural? So there's a threshold that it's like, like you could get into like, oh, what are we calling supernatural? Anyways, that's my 2 cents, but it's just actually wild how many different things can be going on in those years that are just deeply distressing and very even through from doctors and people who are specialists and stuff. They don't quite I've never psychiatrists, there's never enough emphasis on just how distressing the emotionality of being a teenager is.
Well, and I will say something that I think I'm more aware of as an adult is how
Mhm.
comfortable or uncomfortable we as adults are talking about our own mental health. But I think and maybe because I'm just not in that space, but I don't hear a lot of our teenagers being aware
Yeah.
of their mental health or adults being aware of teenagers' mental health, right? We're
It's
all like, thank you
mhm.
for being so open about your mental health, influencer that I love.
Right.
But and that's so important. But are we then continuing and going, gosh, you know what? Maybe my I don't know, 15-year-old cousin who had a panic attack. Maybe they really did, right? Maybe it wasn't them being dramatic or hormonal. Maybe they were sincerely
Having
having a panic attack that felt like a heart attack.
I cannot overstate enough that whatever collective energy we have towards teenagers is part of what's wrong with our society. Because every single adult I know and talk to, except for my therapist colleagues and my friends and stuff, and even some therapists I talk to that are like, colleagues that I get connected to and talk about, if they're on a treatment team or whatever, that they don't necessarily work with me and we don't have the same values, but it is like that. It's like, oh, well, teenagers are like,
So dramatic.
I don't really
Everything's
want
the
to
end of the
deal.
world.
Yeah, it's very like passive and dismissive. And it's almost
Mm.
like, yeah, I don't really want to deal with that. So we're going to move on, and you're going to figure it out yourself. And it's a form of abandonment, really. I think there's a collective and cultural abandonment we have towards teenagers. And it's because they genuinely, and I wholeheartedly believe this, that they are the kind of like center of like the manifestation of all of our societal and sociocultural issues. So if we listen to them, it's like, oh, we have to hear them,
Mm.
and they have a lot to tell us.
Yeah.
So then culturally and collectively, we just dismiss them because the problems are kind of just too inconvenient for anybody to take care of.
Right. Or we would have to come to terms with some of those issues being
Our
systemically from
problem
us. Right. Yeah.
from what we've done. Yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's almost like a family system that is imitate. It's like you can take the family system and then like expand it out and see
Mhm.
it as a collective consciousness of like, okay, collectively, generationally, millennials are better about it, but they're still so appeasing
Yeah.
that it's like that's another form of like not acknowledge. You know what I'm saying? Like this is
Yeah.
just a different way than boomers have done it with us. And so anyway, I think it's fascinating, and I think that everyone should listen to the teenagers in their life because they know exactly what's going on and they have a lot of good opinions. And even though they might be going through some deep, distressing things, if you help them through it and get through the other side of it, everybody's going to be better off.
There you go. Thank you. That was really well said. And yes, so exactly to all of Jerry's beautiful points, adolescence is one of the most emotionally intense periods of a person's life.
Mhm.
Your brain is developing, your hormones are changing, your identity is forming or
Forming.
trying to form. And like you
Mhm.
said, if you don't have real structure and support from peers or otherwise, it's really hard to kind of feel safe to figure out who you are and who you want to be.
And also, too, like part of being a teenager and figuring out who you are is having the texture of your other peers to feel through who you are going to be
Compare
and
and
what you
contrast
want, and
and
like, yeah, like engagement in relationships, and you figuring out like, oh yeah, like that didn't feel good for me. I'm going to try it this way instead.
well, I mean, we're all just collages of people around us because
Literally.
we just take like what we like and we leave what we don't.
Yeah.
And if you don't have any of that to cut and paste to yourself, it's hard.
Difficult.
And just by default, your stress responses are heightened. And we know that regardless of your age, emotional distress can show up very physically. I dated someone who got stomach ulcers regularly from how stressed he would be.
Yeah.
And chest pains, right? Migraines, you can break out in rashes. Our minds and bodies are one and the same. They are not operating separately, right?
Yeah.
Now, with all of that and with all of that beautiful input, we're not saying if there is a psychological component, someone is making something up. That's different. When we say psychological, we are not saying fake. Those are not synonyms. Someone can experience something that feels 100% real without intentionally creating it.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Like sleep paralysis. If you've ever had it, and I have, you know that it's terrifying, even if it only lasts for a moment.
Scary.
Even if you don't see the Hat Man, right?
Yeah.
But that's such a perfect example, right? Because in something like sleep paralysis, people report seeing figures standing beside the bed, mostly the exact same figure, even without hearing stories of what that entity looks like. And so you could definitely say that has to be paranormal or not. Again, I am honest in the state that I think it is paranormal. We've talked about the Hat Man on the podcast, but you don't have to, subscribe to that belief. You can feel pressure on your chest, hear voices, you're unable to move. And don't forget that before the story of the Hat Man and before we understood what sleep paralysis was, regardless of that, for centuries, people interpreted those experiences as demons or witches or spirits. But today we understand the neurological mechanisms at least a little bit better. But that doesn't change the fact that the fear was real, the experience was real. So whether you were experiencing it in a time where you thought a witch had put a curse on you, or if you're experiencing it in a time when you can go, okay, I think my Ambien had a really bad effect on me, the experience is the same. The explanation just changes.
And if we were to get into the physiological thing that's happening, is your body does not know the difference between like when you're imagining something and thinking your way through something. This is why people who have such vivid imaginations experience such complex PTSD. Your body doesn't know the difference between that happening and it actually happening to you. So if you're imagining something, your body's going to respond the same. And also like that fear, your body is still responding to that fear. You know, the whole concept of like, oh, there's not actually a jaguar chasing you. It's just that you're with your in-laws, or that you're, like fighting with your partner, or whatever, having, your best friend's mad at you. It's like, there's not a jaguar chasing you. We're just having like regular, relationship conflict here. It's okay. So,
but it's still fight or flight, and
but
how
it
you respond
still
to that
feels like a jaguar chasing you.
Yep.
Either way, even though there's no jaguar. So yeah, it's crazy how oftentimes our bodies are physiologically having a response without the stimuli actually being as life-threatening as what is actually happening.
Or even related.
And it still feels the same.
Yep.
So
like her waking up in the middle of the night feeling panicked. It's not necessarily that something happened in real life to trigger that, but something was going on within herself to wake up in a state of panic. So this doesn't mean that there was a neurological explanation for this. But what I am trying to ground us in is that human perception is complicated. And I can only imagine it gets further complicated when you have a house full of people and a neighborhood, like a whole community also being like, yeah, this is crazy.
Yes, this is wild. Yes, this is.
And it's all because of you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, even thinking about, you and I have had these conversations, even, recording before, of like being in a group of people who all are believing the same thing, is kind of, you can feel a little drunk off of it. Like it literally has a physical impact on you.
Well, and it's powerful. Look at Scientology. Look at any cult. It doesn't take long before it's like,
Yeah.
There is no alternative, right?
Stress is, I get like worked up just thinking about it.
I know. But that's just it. So reining all of us back in. You might hear an unexpected knock in your house, you shrug it off. But now you and I are sitting together and we both hear it. Well, okay, I'm paying a little bit more attention. Then your, next door neighbor comes over and then we all hear it. Then your doctor's over and we all hear something too. Suddenly we're all paying attention to every creak, every draft, every object that seems like, did that move a little bit? And our brains, we've talked about pareidolia before, right? They are built to find patterns. And if they can't make a pattern, they'll force a pattern. It's one of the reasons that we're still here as a species, right? We talked about it in the Fox sisters case. But that strength can also become a weakness because once we expect something to happen, we start interpreting unrelated events through the lens of, ooh, something is happening. And that's called confirmation bias. And we all do it. And it's not because we're irrational, it's because we're human. We've also talked before about how memory is not a security camera. It's why a lot of times you can't really trust it.
Yeah.
It's more like a story we keep rewriting because that thing that really trips me out if I think about it too long is that every time you remember something, you're not remembering the event, you're remembering the last time you remembered it. So it's why it's also really dangerous to talk about uncovered memories, right? Because
yeah, we're going to get into that soon.
Great, because it's like, what does that mean? So tiny details start to shift. Emotion starts to fill in some gaps. Other people's memories can influence our own. And this does not mean anyone is lying. It's just the way that we recall things. It means that we are sincerely convinced of something, but that also means that maybe not every detail is historically accurate. And I think that's where this gets so interesting because we're not looking at one person's account, we're looking at dozens. So as we head into the next part of Esther's story, I want you to hold two ideas in your mind at the same time. First, it's entirely possible that something happened in that small house that no one could explain. And second, it's entirely possible that sincere people witnessing extraordinary events interpreted them through the only framework they had. Those ideas do not have to cancel each other out. We may never know which one it is, but now let's meet the man that would turn a local mystery into an international one. By this point, word had spread well beyond this household. The knocking, the furniture, the illnesses, everyone was talking about it. And eventually, the story reached a man named Walter Hubble. He's interesting. He was an actor by trade, later a writer. Depending on who you ask, he was either an unusually careful observer or the world's luckiest ghost story salesman. Because without him, there's a very good chance that none of us would know Esther's name today. He arrived in Amherst curious, but reportedly skeptical, according to him. And that's our first reminder that Hubble is also our narrator. When you are researching history, especially a story like this, it's really important to remember who's telling this story.
Who is telling you the story?
And what might they gain from telling it? That does not automatically mean that someone is dishonest, but it should make you thoughtful. And according to Hubble, he intended to expose the whole thing as a fraud. He was the Houdini of this, right? But instead, he claimed he became convinced that something genuinely unexplained was happening. And in fact, he moved into the home for several weeks.
There was not enough people in there. He said, I am going to contribute to this household.
I'm going to add one more body to this. Yeah.
What an odd way to...
Isn't that
weird?
odd?
That's weird.
Yeah, he didn't just stop by. He lived there and he kept a lot of notes. These notes would later become the book, The Great Amherst Mystery, which was published in 1879. And like I said at the top, it is still the primary source that almost everyone references today, which is super valuable, but also super frustrating because when one source dominates the historical record, it's really hard to kind of separate observation from interpretation. Because there, like I said, sources for this episode are also newspapers and other recountings, but largely this guy.
You know what really frustrates me while we're here? Is this is making me think of our girl Clara. From like one of the first episodes you did the possession case.
Yep.
Why do we never ever
Hear from
get
them?
first account experiences of what happened? It is so frustrating to me that
Well,
we never ever get that
I think you
story.
answered it yourself in saying that we do not give credit to teenagers or children,
Fair enough.
right? So I'm sure the
Yeah.
last thing on anyone's mind was like, hey, would you like to write any of this down? One day
Yeah.
we'll want to hear what you had to say. No. This man came in and was like, I'm going to tell your story, kid.
That's exactly what happened with Clara too. It's like, oh, all of these adults and
The
men are going
priests and
to,
the nuns and
and
everyone are
that
like,
had an
I'll write this
agenda.
down.
So it's like, okay, yeah, there's an agenda there and you're contradicting it if you share your side of it. I get it. But it's like worth naming how freaking frustrating it is to never hear. We never hear from them ever.
And to Hubble's credit, he doesn't write like he's trying to convince you that everything is supernatural.
Mhm.
Because I think definitely with the priests and the nuns, it was like, and this is why we need to work harder and have more people. And, you know, because sometimes
Be
he does,
Catholic.
come here, we'll fix you. Because sometimes he does openly admit, like, I have no explanation for what I saw.
Mm.
But other times he'll also just give an account of something like this happened, and there's not really any analysis.
Okay.
But there are also moments where his enthusiasm definitely shines. So it's I think totally fair to take him seriously, but you should also take him critically, right?
Mm.
According to Hubble, the disturbances continued the whole time he was there. Objects moved in full view of witnesses. Knocking responded to conversations. Classic. Small household items flew across rooms. One account describes a box of matches suddenly launching through the air. That potato story also happened.
A potato flew around the room.
Another claims a pocket knife appeared to move without anyone touching it. That feels like a threat.
That feels threatening.
But perhaps most unsettling, the activity seemed to be selective because it didn't happen all day, every day. It came in bursts, and sometimes everything would be quiet for hours. Then the room would erupt into chaos. So if we're putting ourselves in Hubble's shoes, we have moved into this house. We are trying to determine whether the family is pulling off some elaborate hoax. If nothing happens, we're going to leave convinced that we were right and it's all nonsense. But if things keep happening in front of us, well, what do we do with that? Because that's apparently not the story that we came to tell. But as he continues to document the case, more visitors arrive. And like I said, some walk in and they're expecting to witness a miracle. Some want to expose the family because they're convinced that they're just frauds. But imagine the pressure of either of those. Because every strange sound is a performance. If it's quiet, then it's a disappointment. If there's a dramatic event, then there's another story that people are going to carry back into town. And before long, Amherst has become known for one thing, not its farms, not its industry, not its wonderful, charming people, but its haunted house. And this is where the story takes another unexpected turn. Esther decides, I'm out.
Oh.
She leaves. She's like, I am
Oh.
moving. If it's the house that's haunted, it would solve the problem.
Right.
She's no longer in the haunted house. If the activity is tied to the building, then leaving the building is going to end her torture.
Obviously, yeah.
But according to several accounts, it did not. Esther accepted work on a nearby farm, and for a little while, we had that quiet again. Then one afternoon, a fire broke out inside the barn. The blaze was extinguished before it caused any catastrophic damage, but suspicion immediately fell on Esther. Did she start the fire? Did she accidentally start a fire? Or was this a haunting that has now turned very dangerous? She was arrested and charged with arson.
What?
She is having a very bad time. Before anyone gasps, it's important to know that she served a very short sentence. Many historians believe the conviction had a lot less to do with actual strong evidence that proved that she had done anything intentionally, and it was more to do with the fact that at that point, Esther had a reputation. She was the girl that strange things happened around. Now, I don't think that's fair. I think that's a whole other can of worms. But I also can't imagine how she would have tried to defend herself. If she's saying, well, I didn't start the fire. And she's being asked, well, aren't you the girl whose furniture flies across rooms? It's not really like a jury-friendly reputation, right? And this is so Salem coded to me.
Yeah,
because once a community decides what you are, it is very difficult to become anything else. And the fire only fueled the rumors. Some took it as proof that Esther herself was really dangerous. And others thought that it was just evidence that whatever had been tormenting her had followed her to a new location. Either way, her life had become really inseparable at this point from the mystery. And that's pretty much where the public version of the story tends to end. But before we decide what any of it means, I do want to stop one more time because there's another lens which we can view Esther's story. One that's not so much about was the house haunted, but instead what was happening inside Esther herself. But before we get into the final piece of this story, I do want to shift gears one more time because instead of asking what made that house haunted, what's going on there, I think the better question is, like we alluded to in talking about sort of the development of teenagers, what's happening to Esther? Something that feels really important because whatever your beliefs are about the paranormal, I don't think this episode works if we assume that Esther was crazy, if she was out of her mind or delusional. And I also don't think it works if we assume that she's possessed, because those are not the only two options. Obviously, we know that humans inherently are far more complicated than that, even if you do believe in supernatural like I do, because we know, and psychologists like Jerry know, that trauma doesn't just affect our memories, it affects our bodies, our nervous systems, our immune systems, and the way that we process stress, and sometimes our perception of reality, which you explained just now. And everyone's probably heard the phrase, the body keeps the score. It's the title of a book, but it's also a concept that's been supported by decades of research because traumatic experiences really do leave lasting physical and psychological effects. This doesn't mean that hauntings are caused by trauma. It's not an if this, then that. But it does mean that trauma can show up in ways that are difficult to explain if you don't know the person's history. Today, we have language for things that people in Esther's time of 1878 just didn't. PTSD, panic disorder, depression, functional neurological disorders, conversion disorder. These are not things that anyone would have been offering up. That physician that came to her house, not going to be checking his list for any of these symptoms. And even though, like Jerry said, some of those terms and some of those diagnoses can sound really intimidating or they can almost sound like insults, but at their core, they point to the same idea that sometimes the brain's attempt to protect us can produce symptoms that are very real.
That's literally what it's all about. It's protecting yourself.
Yes. So someone could temporarily lose their ability to speak after a traumatic event. They could lose movement in a limb. They could experience seizures that are not caused by epilepsy. They could develop chronic pain with no obvious physical injury. None of those symptoms are make-believe. They are very real. They just don't have the cause that you would usually associate those responses.
Yeah, and all the meanwhile you're going through those physiological experiences. If you're physically feeling these things, you could be in a state of like hyperarousal or hypo. There's hyper and hypo, but hyperarousal is like that paranoia when you're feeling on edge. It's like everything kind of like makes you feel like a little spooked and like on, you're on alert. And hypo is when you're like gassed out and like you're kind of feeling numb,
like numb
and
to the
like,
world.
You don't feel anything at all. It's like that's either direction you can go in, but the hyperarousal, at least in my own experiences, has been the most distressing times of my life is when I've had paranormal experiences, quote unquote paranormal experiences happen to myself. So
right.
Yeah.
Now, does any of that explain furniture moving across a room?
Sure doesn't.
Sure doesn't. And that's where this case gets really tricky, because if we're looking at Esther's reported physical symptoms, there were some, right? We've got the swelling, the exhaustion, the fear, she cannot sleep. This fits surprisingly well with what we know about the profound effects that stress can have on the body. But if we're talking about dozens of witnesses all claiming to see objects move, well, that's a lot harder to explain because unless they all had one collective trauma, that's tricky.
Even then, like, wait, what?
So let's talk about witnesses. Memory is social. If you and I both experience something confusing, we're going to start comparing notes. Well, what did you see? Well, I thought I saw this. Oh, but I thought it happened over there. We start shaping each other's memories. It's why if you're ever a witness of a crime, you should never, ever, ever speak to anyone else that was a witness of a crime, because suddenly, instead of saying, yeah, the bank robber was wearing a red shirt, you talk to that person over there, and then you're telling the cops, yeah, I think he had on like a blue sweater. No idea. So because that's literally how human memory works, in a small town, you're also compounding religious beliefs, newspaper attention, curiosity seeking. People are already showing up, sort of prepped to witness something extraordinary. That's a recipe where expectation and interpretation are very deeply intertwined. I said it already in this episode, but it's pareidolia, right? Like when someone points out a face in the clouds. Once they've said it, it's hard to not see a face in the clouds. It's also called priming, because once our brains are given a framework, they start organizing new information around it. It's why when Zach Bagans says that the voice said, "Get out," and all you heard was blah, 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 blah. Well, then when they play it again, it does sound like "get out." He's right.
Yeah, I hear it. Yeah, exactly.
Because your brain went, okay, sure, yes. Once again, that does not prove that this was a mass suggestion, but it also doesn't prove it was paranormal. But I think that's why this case has been around for so long, because no explanation really fits one way or another. The supernatural explanation leaves the skeptics unconvinced. The psychological explanation leaves the believers unconvinced. But somewhere in the middle is the person we don't get to hear from, Esther, a young woman who almost certainly experienced genuine fear. Her life was turned upside down. She became famous for reasons that she never could have imagined nor probably desired. Whether she was haunted, misunderstood, or carrying something that no one in her era had the language to recognize, she deserved compassion. And with that in mind, there is one final piece of Esther's story that I did intentionally leave out. Not because it's not important, but because I wanted you to experience the mystery the same way that the people of Amherst did. They saw the phenomenon, and only later did they begin asking what might have happened to the young woman at the center of it all, which is pretty lousy because Jerry had literally asked that like 20 minutes in. But let's talk about it. The piece of her story that I left out until now might actually be the most important part of this case, because if I had told you at the beginning, you would have filtered everything through it. So let's rewind. Only a short time before the knocking started, before the bed was shaking, before her limbs were swelling, and way before Walter Hubble arrived and just moved himself in, Esther had experienced something deeply traumatic. According to multiple historical accounts, Esther was courted by a man named Bob McNeil. One evening, while the two were together, he allegedly became violent. He pulled a pistol, threatened to kill her, and attempted to sexually assault her. Esther did manage to escape. Her sister Olive actually intervened, and McNeil fled. Whether you believe every supernatural claim in this story, or if you don't believe any of them, one thing we can all agree on is that that is traumatic. And it wasn't talked about that way in 1878. There was no trauma-informed care. There was no counseling, no victim advocacy. Instead, the response was just kind of like, okay, move on.
Yeah, it was pretty normalized, I would imagine. I mean, it still is at this point, but...
Yeah, let's be real.
Yeah.
But yeah, you just keep going, keep working, keep living, move on from it. And according to the timeline that most historians accept, the unexplained activity began almost immediately after this attack. Now, correlation is not causation, but it certainly does change the lens through which many people view this story. Because instead of asking, why would a ghost choose Esther? Now we can ask, what happens to the human mind after profound trauma when you're only 18 years old? Some people become hypervigilant, always waiting for danger. Some develop panic attacks. These are all things that Jerry really eloquently explained in the middle of this episode. Some totally dissociate. Some struggle with memory, and some develop physical symptoms that have no obvious medical explanation. And in the 19th century, none of that would have been understood. Like Jerry just said, it's still not super well understood today, depending on where you are. If someone couldn't explain what they were seeing, they reached for the explanations available. Religion, spiritualism, which would be really on the rise very soon. And it makes me wonder, when researching this story and when telling it, if Esther had lived today, would this story even exist? Now, in a world of TikTok, probably, but the way that it existed here, probably not. But there's still one problem: the witnesses. Because even if her own symptoms can be viewed through the lens of trauma, what about everybody else?
Right.
Were they all mistaken? Were they all lying, exaggerating? Or did something genuinely happen inside that house that we can't explain? Now, there's also, of course, the realm, which I won't even really venture into because I don't want this to be a 3-hour episode, but there's also a world where we say she did very much create a poltergeist. And it was caused by trauma. And all this energy she had to be manifested somewhere because she didn't know how to process her trauma. And boom, now she has a really violent poltergeist. And look, frankly, to me, that makes a lot of sense, but not to everybody, and that's fine. But I mean, at the end of the day, an 18-year-old woman survived an act of unimaginable violence. Then she spent the rest of her life being remembered for what happened around her, not to her. And frankly, that's incredibly sad.
It's really upsetting. It changes. And this is what we do every time with every story we get into. It totally changes the sensationalism of the story. And it's like, ooh, actually, this is a real person who went through real shit. And actually, it's not so fun anymore when
Exactly.
you consider what this is someone who went through something pretty devastating.
Yeah. So I think honestly where I sit is probably actually what I just said, which is that she had intense trauma, no way to cope. All that energy manifested and did actually make a haunting. And that's why there were witnesses, but I don't know.
I mean, the counter to that, I was thinking about how, I mean, again, for the sake of time, it's like another branch of this could be that, there was an animal that lived in the house and the witnesses heard an animal, and she's also still going through these psychologically distressing, like it could be both, right? It could be that the witnesses heard this thing in the house, some sort of like weird experience that was actually physically happening. She was still going through all these deeply psychologically destabilizing things at the same time. I mean, there's a myriad of different ways we can.
Well, and I'm also going to throw something out here too that I didn't see, at least in my research. I don't know, maybe other people are saying it, but her sister was part of how she managed to get away from her attacker. So that's already 2 people in the house that have experienced trauma. Because I would say it's equal, right? She was still a part of this. So now let's say if you have 2 people experiencing trauma, not knowing what to do with it, maybe Esther disassociates. Maybe her sister is like so hyper aroused that she's popping her toe joints, not even thinking about it. And she's answering questions, right? When someone's asking who's there.
There's so many ways.
There's a lot of ways you could go.
Yeah. And I was thinking about this too earlier as you were describing something else, is that the most psychologically unbearable thing, like for our brains, is uncertainty. So that's the filter in which everything operates through, is that how, without even thinking, your brain is doing it. That's the processing that it's going through, is that how can I make this more certain? And so to your point about like the religion, later on the more supernatural wave, and like the spiritual wave, I mean, spiritualism wave, or like any explanations that make it feel more certain and less fearful and uncertain. Like that's the way that it's going to go. And that's shaped by your beliefs, it's shaped by your environment. I mean, that's a whole other conversation, but it's unbearable to feel uncertain.
Well, and if any of you listening think something totally separate than any of these things, let us know.
Yeah.
But thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, we would love it if you would subscribe, leave a nice review, or share us with someone who also loves exploring the intersection of faith, history, psychology, and the unexplained. Until next time, I'm Heather.
I'm Jerry.
And we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.